The Acacia class, aka Batch 1 Flyer class sloops of World War One, and pretty much the first of the smaller ships which I've actually started doing for the key ship series. Basically, my view is I can do pretty much any ship in the key ship series and talk about what makes them a key ship, because almost anything, any ship can be argued to be a key ship in their own way. It's one of the reasons why I chose that name for the series. Why am I doing the Acacia class now? Why am I starting off with them rather than the Flyer class corvettes of World War One? Well, there's two reasons. One, I'm saving the Flyer class corvettes so when the book that I'm writing about them is ready. Seems sensible. Good way to launch it. And secondly, because I'm bowing to peer pressure. There are 4 of you who watch this channel who have been commenting on this topic and asking for the Acacia class. 2 have even broken into the lives and started doing it. 1 even manages to get every personal message they ever seem to send me around to the topic of the Acacia class. So I am just bowing into peer pressure. I am shamelessly folding. I mean, it's not as if it's something I want to do anyway, so I'm giving in, but no. I'm bowing to peer pressure. Because these ships matter. And the first thing that happens whenever I bring them up is people go, oh, those were built in World War One to respond to the submarines. Au no contraire. They were not. For starters, they're launched in 1915. World War One gets started in 1914. Submarine threat is growing, but it's not enough that in 1915, when they order these, and pretty much they order them almost at the beginning of 1915, they order the first 12 on the 1st of January and the next 12 on the 12th of January 1915. Submarines, as in the torpedoes from submarines, are not what they're worrying about. They're worrying about mines. So, may I introduce you to the minesweeping Flower class. And, well, before we get into that too much, shameless book plug. This book is something I'm pretty darn proud of. I'm looking forward to when it has siblings. It was not my first book I ever wrote. It was the first to ever be published. Following it up, making sure the books that come after it live up to it, and knowing it's got a second edition, etc., has been an interesting challenge. But I think we might be getting there. So here is the Acacia. Now, they're otherwise known as the cabbage or herbaceous borderers. You were asleep and you're sneaking in now, aren't you? They have all sorts of lovely names. But the first thing to notice is that we make a big fuss in World War II Flyer class corvettes about the fact that they have the mast before the bridge and how that affects them in their movement. It's often forgotten that that was the standard format for the Flyer class sloops in World War One. The mast was in front of the bridge. Again, it's to do with the minesweeping duties, because if you have someone up there, they're nicely high up to look down over the bow and spot anything. It's very useful. They're built on as commercial a sized and shaped hull as possible. And they are built because the Royal Navy desperately needs minesweepers. Because, up until this point, the Royal Navy's main plan for minesweeping, prior to the early 1900s, had been to use their old ships. All those old ships they had wandering around in places. Yeah, just use them for minesweeping. The old small ships. The very same ships that Jackie Fisher got rid of by the dozen. Yeah. Those are the ships which they needed and wanted for mine warfare. The fluff is getting closer. I think he wants a pat. Good boy. Now, as I've already mentioned, there were 24 of these ships, and they were ordered, well, within roughly 11 days of each other. Less than a little over a week, less than 2 weeks goes past between them ordering one and then going, we need another 12. We need to exercise our order. And when you consider the Flower class as a whole, from World War One, there are 36 vessels in the Arabis class, there are 12 vessels in the Azela class, 24 in the Acacia class, and they're the first ones. The submarine ships are not ordered till, well, they're ordered 1916 and 1917 respectively. That's when they're ordered. But 24 are the Acacia class. And they go on to have an eventful career, and they have eventful post-war careers. Only 2 of them are actually lost during World War One. 2 out of 24. They're good ships. They are, aren't they? Yes. So, when I press N, it's supposed to jump forward, but it's not at the moment. I don't know why. The quick keys seem to have gone a bit nutty on me. So here are their vitals. Displacement, 1,200 tons. Length. Well, that says 250 tons there, but I'm fairly sure it's supposed to say 250 feet. I know. 76.2 meters, that is, between the perpendiculars, and 262 foot, or 6 inches, or 80 meters overall. Now, this again compares kind of well with other vessels that will do a similar role in the future. The Black Swan class, well, they are 1,250 tons in their original form, 1,350 tons in their modified form, and they're 299 feet, 6 inches. In overall length. That's 91.29 meters. Their beam is slightly bigger as well, and their draft is actually slightly shallower for the Black Swans. But if we compare to the Flower class corvettes, and there's a reason these are called sloops, not corvettes. Well, the Flower class corvettes, they're 62.5 meters overall length. So they are 18 meters, roughly. 18, hang on now. Let's do this precisely. 17.6 meters shorter overall. Their draft is slightly shallower at 3.5 meters. And their beam is exactly the same, 10.1 meters or 33 feet. The Flower class from World War One were bigger. They were still war-build emergency ships, but they're not the war-build emergency ships of World War II. They're the war-build emergency ships of the infrastructure of World War I, where Britain can afford to build something actually bigger and get it done faster. It helps. It does. To have a strong maritime industry, to have a strong maritime infrastructure that allows you to churn things out. They also are a class which starts the Royal Navy's small ships, well, when I say starts it, probably for World War I most exemplifies the Royal Navy's habit of, we have a designed armament of these ships. Yes, we have no idea what they're actually armed with. The same approach the admirals took to, oh, we've got a Town-class cruiser over there. Yeah, we honestly knew we had one deployed there. What is it? Yes, Minister, we knew one was doing something, was doing operations. Yes, it's counter-surface radar operations. Yes, Minister, we completely support. It's part of our global coverage scenario going on. With the Flower class sloops, it was a case of, and what did they fight off again? How? Where did they get that? No, no, they were not supposed to have raided HMS Victory for cannon. HMS Victory had cannon aboard her. She doesn't now. Okay. That's not okay. If she had cannon aboard her, why are they not aboard her? I'm not saying any cannon from HMS Victory actually did end up on Flower class sloops, but there is certainly a possibility. They did seem to go for a collect them all, and the more intriguing the better arrangement with their weaponry. Their power, well, that's 2 cylindrical boilers, supplying a single 4-cylinder triple expansion engine to drive 1 screw. They were designed for 1400 horsepower, or 1800, depending on which engine type you're looking at. Batch 1 versus Batch 2. That was supposed to allow them to get to 17 knots. They were found to actually require roughly 2,200 indicated horsepower for the speed. Now, I would point out they did make that speed, but that was mostly due to some interesting adaptations by engineering personnel, which should probably be best forgotten for fear that they might inspire future generations to greater things of disturbingness. I.e., if there's any ship in the Royal Navy in World War I which probably more typifies the machine spirit and desires of the Imperium of Man from Warhammer 40k when it comes to ship design, no, the engines on these ships seem to even beat that of HMS Warsprite. Yeah, she's they are intriguing. They could also achieve roughly 2,000 nautical miles at 15 knots with a maximum of 250 tons of coal. And again, that was something they found that could be variable. There are many ways you can carry more coal. There are also ways you can carry other things, like it's a mine layer. No, it's a minesweeper, we're sure, but it's carrying mines on it. We just need. Well, we picked them up, so we thought we might as well use them. You're redeploying the enemy's mines. Probably. That's a good way to put it. Redeploying, yes. They're very brave crews. They really are. And luckily we do have some accounts of some of them that actually do sort of survive for us to go through and to discuss. Now, if we just click on to the next slide. The ships of the class. I wanted to go through this quickly. Now, this is a interesting one because it's got Acacia, Anomi, Aster, Bluebell, Daffodil, Dahlia, Daphne, Foxglove, Hollyhock, Honeysuckle, Iris, Jaquil, Laburnum, Larkspur, Lavender, Lilac, Lily, Magnolia, Mallow, Marigold, Mimosa, Primrose, Sunflower, and Veronica. Now look at the names of the people who are building. Swan Hunter, building a fair number. Scott's building some. These are some fairly big firms, but also Barclay Curl. They're building a few. Lobnitz and Company. Napier Miller. Archibald Macmillan and Son. William Simons and Company. D&W Henderson and Company of Glasgow. And Dunlop Bremer Company, of course. All these yards are being called upon to build these ships. And also think about how quickly they get them into service, because they are ordered in January 1915, and a lot of them are launched by April 1915, and some May, some June, but very quickly, and into service just as quickly. This is that whole infrastructure advantage thing. This is how the Royal Navy fights a war. They maintain the infrastructure in peacetime by ordering sufficient ships to keep everything going. And then in wartime, they just go, build. And think about this from the German perspective. Can they order a class of 24 sloops and get them delivered within less than 9 months? No. They can't. And these are not the only ships they order that year, the Royal Navy. They are churning out vessels of all sizes. This is HMS Foxglove. Now, she has an interesting career, and her career stretches through World War One, the 1920s, and World War Two. She serves the entirety of World War Two, and is pretty much the last surviving Acacia class in service with the Royal Navy, and is sold for scrapping in September 1946. So, she does well. She is, she's described in many works as having a wide array of armament fitted throughout the years. And in one note I have read, which archives was it about her? I think it was the archive of the place where she was having the refit. Where was she having her refit? Her interwar refit. I've completely blanked. I think it's one. It will be in either Newcastle or Scott. It's one of the 3 archives I wander up around the north when I go through them. But it described her as having a comprehensive approach to weaponry. I'm not sure what that exactly was a euphemism for, but I'm fairly certain that meant that someone was removing quite a lot of stuff that they didn't realise was still in service with the Royal Navy from her. Or either that, or she managed to find things which were currently... of course, they didn't use the phrase historically comprehensive array of weaponry, so... who knows what that shit was fitted with. I almost don't want to know, because it's almost nice not knowing. She was the first of her class to enter service, entering service in May 1915. She deploys to Scapa Flow, and in June 1915, along with her sister ship Acacia, goes and hunts the U-19, which had sunk 2 British steamers. Now, she's of course a minesweeping vessel, but they're sending her off to hunt U-19 because they're fairly good at this job. Okay, they're minesweepers, but they're also the same things which build a decent minesweeper, build a decent anti-submarine warfare hunter. And the U-19 has sunk 2 British steamers, 10 fishing vessels, and a Danish sailing vessel east of Fair Isle in the Orkney Islands between the 2nd and 4th of June. So, 5th June, they're dispatching 2 vessels to go hunt her. They didn't find her because U-19 by that point had decided to wander to the south. But they did rescue survivors from the trawlers sunk by the submarines. And whilst they didn't break from minesweeping to convoy duties until 1917, they did do quite a lot of these go off and hunt missions. And it was quite worrying for the Germans at a certain point once they started appearing, because these were the vessels they really didn't want to engage. Because if you use a torpedo on it, well, you've just wasted a torpedo. Because what value is this target? The Royal Navy can build them at a rate that if it starts to be an attrition war between you, the submarines, and them, and that's what you're going off and fighting, the Royal Navy will probably win that. They won't want to do it that way because it costs a lot of lives, but they'll probably win that. Because it's a lot cheaper and a lot quicker for the Royal Navy to build these than it is for, and train the crew for these. And of course the crew for these are more likely to survive than a submarine which sinks. And the Royal Navy is more likely to recover them. So that's all a lot cheaper. And if you engage it with guns, well, and I'm going to use this as the starting armament. I just want to describe it. I know it's the designed armament, but I want to use it. I'm going to use it as the starting armament, the baseline armament of two 12-pounder guns and two 3-pounder guns. They're fairly able to fight a surface fight with a submarine. Okay, they might not really want to get in a tussle with a destroyer with that level of armament, but that level of armament will deal with a submarine on the surface. Again, submarine is designed to sink. It doesn't need much damage to make it do what it's designed to do. A sloop is designed to float. It needs a lot of damage, comparatively, to make it do something other than it's designed to do. And Foxglove does this. During the 1920s, she serves on the China Station. In fact, she's there when the SS Hongmo is the Singaporean passenger ship is grounded off White Rocks off Lamok Island and wrecked with a loss of about 1,000 lives. She is one of the ships which is sent to try and assist and try and help. She actually arrived late on the 5th of March and guided in Carlisle on the 6th of March. They managed to rescue between 28 to 48 survivors. There are sources which say 28 and there are sources which say 48. And there are primary sources which say both, which they're pointing to. So it could be one or the other. I have a suspicion the difference in numbers might relate to the fact that the Royal Navy crew didn't care who they were rescuing, but some of the sources cared who they rescued. If that makes sense. Carlisle, it's always nice to have a C-class cruiser around, remained on the scene till the 8th of March, but Foxglove went back once she got the first set of survivors off. Carlisle managed to stay and return to Hong Kong with 221 survivors aboard, but Foxglove had been moving around for longer before that, and of course carries a lot less fuel and resources than Carlisle, so can't stay there as long in the first place. In World War II, she's one of two Acacia class which have survived long enough to see active service in World War II. She's actually dive-bombed by German aircraft off the Isle of Wight on 9th of July 1940 while she's escorting a convoy. You know, as you do. Let's just think about that. She was actively escorting a convoy in 1940. She remained afloat despite being hit by the bomb and is converted into a combination ship and base ship. She's then put into role as a harbour guard ship in 1941, serving in Londonderry for the remainder of World War II. As said earlier, she sold for scrapping in 1946. She has a long career in the Royal Navy. A long career for a war emergency ship. Lord Burnham has a very different career than Foxglove. Not as long. Not that far shorter, but not as long. She starts off with commissioning into the first sloop flotilla, and very shortly after that, she's part of the group which goes to try and recover the Hesperian, which was a liner torpedoed by U-20, southwest of Queenstown. She's part of the group that goes to try and recover the ship, to try and save it, to try and bring it into port. Unfortunately, they fail. But she's there along with Marigold, with Veronica, and with the seaplane carrier Empress to try and get Hesperian to safety. She is then, of course, quite enjoying the fact that after that, with Woodrow Wilson's complaint to Chancellor Holweg, that passenger liners were not supposed to be sunk without warning, and Hesperian hadn't been given a warning, the submarine campaign is paused for a few months. Unfortunately, her peace does not last those full months, because in 1916, there's the Easter Rising. On the 25th of April, she is ordered to go to Galway to defend the port. She arrives there on the 26th, and she pretty much, as soon as she gets there, starts to hear that there are a group of rebels advancing on the port, that there are people coming to try and take the port. Her commanding officer orders her to open fire, and they fire 10 shells in the direction of the rebels at a road on the outskirts of the city. The rebels withdraw. It was enough. There wasn't really a strong effort, and frankly, Laburnum sitting there is enough of a force to go, really? On the 28th of April, she escorted a transport carrying troops into Galway to secure the port properly. She had done it herself for the previous few days, but to make sure that nothing got in their way, submarine or trawler, or suspicious other vessel, Laburnum does the escort duty. In 1917, February, another vessel is torpedoed, the SS Mantola. This time by U-81, 143 miles west-southwest of Fastnet Rock. Her crew abandoned the Mantola, but U-81 remained in the vicinity until Laburnum arrived, in which case U-81 decided that she didn't really want to have an argument with her. Laburnum looked like she was upset. And so Laburnum rescued 176 survivors of the passengers and crew, but was unable to take the vessel in tow, and it sank on the 9th of February. On the 17th of February 1917, the Q ship Farnborough was torpedoed by U-83. But after a panic party had faked abandoning that particular ship, U-83 was pulled in by it and was sunk by shell fire from the Q ship. But with Farnborough being badly damaged, she was taken in tow by Laburnum. And this time, finally, Laburnum was successful. Laburnum... Oof. Sorry, old boy. Laburnum managed to get a ship to safety. Admittedly, she's backed up this time by Buttercup, of course another flower class, and HMS Naval, a destroyer that took off most of Farnborough's crew. Farnborough is beached at Mill Cove, and, well, there you go. Success. She's finally managed to rescue a ship. When she's gone out to rescue them, she's finally brought the ship home. Or as close as she needed to. Later in February 1917, she was patrolling west of the Blanket Islands when she was ordered to meet up with the Laconia and try and bring her in safety. Unfortunately, there was uncertainty about the rendezvous, and Laconia was torpedoed by U-50 before Laburnum could arrive on the scene. She managed to rescue 292 passengers and crew from Laconia. I'd like to point out at this point, and don't take this the wrong way, but whilst yes, the luck was now with her, so far every ship she'd been sent to rescue had been torpedoed and sunk. I'm not saying that, you know, yeah, she got the Farnborough home, but I'm just saying that maybe with her track record, they should have tried to have another one be dispatched to go to the liner. Nothing against the crew. The crew are incredibly brave. They're doing a very good job. Just seems to be the luck wasn't with her enough that I would necessarily send her to pick up an ocean liner. Just my own personal view on that one. Post World War I, she ends up going to the New Zealand Division of the Royal Navy. Rather similar to Foxglove. Wandered off with them as well. And she exercised with cruisers, toured New Zealand ports, took part in ceremonial occasions, you know, all that lovely stuff. Was a favourite for wandering around the Pacific Islands. And her sister Veronica did pretty much the same thing. She was paid off in 1935 to become a drill and training ship for the Straits Settlement Naval Volunteer Reserve. Basically, she's converted almost into a headquarters ship, okay? She has wireless equipment, all the sort of the radios. She has offices for various people added on and extended defense officers and all sorts of things added on. She has her engines removed. And I have to always check that, because it always scares me when a ship has its engines removed, because I just think it's the most absurd thing to do. But it gives you a lot of space for other things to do with her. And that allows a huge amount of space to be freed up for accommodation. Hence, when war breaks out, while she's the host to the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve Penang Division, she also can't do anything for the defence of Singapore. She can't also be part of the evacuation. You basically have a ship there that no help. Which, unsurprisingly, means that she's scuttled on 15th of February 1942 because they want to deny everything they can to the Japanese, who then, well, leave her be. She's raised in 1946, and then she sunk off East Lagoon again as part of the breakwater of Old Hunks, and moved and scrapped in 1967. She didn't exactly have a lucky career, sadly. HMS Veronica, well, her sister in the New Zealand service, she has a slightly different career, Palan. Only a small one. She spends most of her World War I service in the Mediterranean. She's actually damaged at one point by the German UB-42. But she's repaired and returned to service, and this again shows the very big problem with these ships, because again, even if you aim to take them out, you don't know, even if hitting them doesn't always work, and then you've just wasted your shot, because they're very easy to repair. From 1920 to 1934, she's part of New Zealand Division of Royal Navy, and she does all sorts of interesting things, including she is the critical vessel in the 1931 Hawke's Bay earthquake. She had birthed in... I was going to say borfed. What's borfing? Birthed in Port Arthuri. No, Ahuri. Ahuri. I keep wanting to call it Arthuri. It's Ahuri. 3 hours before the earthquake hit. She radioed for Auckland to get help. She did the first radio message to get out. And this is where light cruisers Dunedin and Diomede come along, and they help out. And she's then docked because, well, after all the clearing up and all the messages being done, the seabed had literally risen up underneath her. Unsurprisingly, it had done a little bit of damage. And while she's repaired, in 1934 she leaves New Zealand for paying off in England. And she's sold in February 1935 to John Cashmere Limited, and broken up in Newport, Wales in 1935. If you're like me, sitting there thinking, this is a perfectly serviceable ship for what you needed to do, why is it being got rid of? Well, the old answer is, out with the old, in with the new. It's 1935. As I've said before, whilst theoretically in 1932 they dropped the 10-year rule, it's actually the purse strings aren't really released till 1937, and there's a lot of things got rid of between 1932 and 37 which would have been really useful to have had in World War II. But of course, and I'm talking about things which were not affected by the London Naval Treaty in any shape or form. This vessel is 1,200 tons. She has a top speed, if everything's with her, of 17 knots. She is definitely not designed to carry torpedoes, i.e. she's a Section 8 ship, she's a Part 8 ship. She's the same as all sloops. You could have kept her. Now you can tell me that, well, her hull is 20 years old by this point, look at what she's been through. All true. But her engine still works. Her hull has actually been reconditioned in 1931. She's still a viable ship for what you need her to do. And what would she be needed to do? Minesweeping, escorting convoys. And every ship you have available for that role at the beginning of the war is going to ease the burden further down, because Every ship that strengthens a convoy at the beginning of the war is going to cost the Germans far more than anything else, because they have built all their crews up to be the kernel of future crews. So any crews you take out at the beginning, well, this is one of the reasons why the Germans had so much trouble mobilising a destroyer force after Narvik, because they've lost their destroyer force. All those officers, all those senior NCOs who were there going to provide the colonels of the expanded destroyer fleet are killed or demoralised. That is what happens at Narvik. That's why the German destroyer force after that never amounts to as much as it could have been. Imagine if you have enough escorts running around that similar things happen to the submarine service of the German Navy. If they lose enough submariners at the beginning of the war. The more that every submarine they lose at the beginning of the war is probably 3, 4, 5 crews worth of key individuals later on in the war. And that's a conservative estimate by some historians. I've seen some people put it as wild as 20, and I'm just going, no. But then they're using what they're calling the grandfather, what they call the, well, sometimes they call it the grandfather effect, and sometimes they call it the generational training effect, because they're talking about not just the people who are trained on that boat and then go on to provide the core of crews on the other boats, but they're talking about the people, those people then train who go on to become the core of the next boats. And I think that's trying to take on too many second and third order effects, really. I don't know. But she is a loss. She would have been useful. And sadly enough, that's like a lot of them. A lot of the class would have been useful. A lot of the class would have been helpful. If we go through this list again, which I did skip through quickly, I do admit. But Acacia and Anwan were sold in September 1922 for breaking up. Asta had been lost in World War I, mined in the Mediterranean. Bluebell was sold for breaking up in May 1930. Daffodil is sold for breaking up in February 1935. Dahlia sold for breaking up in July 1932. Daphne, January 1923. Foxglove, of course, I've mentioned, served throughout World War II. Hollyhock was sold for breaking up in October 1930. Honeysuckle, September 1922. Iris became a mercantile vessel called Principe de Asturias. She was sold for that in January 1920. Joquil was sold in May 1920 to Portugal, became the NRP Cavall Arjo, classified as a cruiser by them and discarded in 1959. Laburnum, I've mentioned. Larkspur, sold for breaking up in March 1922. Lavender, of course, I mentioned. The other one lost in World War I, sunk by UC-75 in May 1917. Lilac, sold for breaking up in December 1922. Lily became a depot ship in October 1923, renamed Vulcan II, then renamed Adamant II in 1930, and sold for breaking up in June 1930, because, of course, we won't need more depot ships very shortly after that point, will we? Magnolia, sold for breaking up in July 1932. Mallow, transferred to the Royal Australian Navy in 1919, dismantled in July 1932, and sunk as a target off Sydney in August 1935. Oh, that's such a useful use of that ship. Marigold became in January 1920 became the mercantile Principe di Piemonte. Mimosa sold for breaking up in November 1922. Primrose sold for breaking up in April 1923. Sunflower, well, sold to Rangoon Port Commissioners in 1921, renamed Lambia. Sold in 1923 to Osaka Shasun, renamed Yashima Maru, possibly broken up in 1953. And Veronica, as said, broken up in 1935. What a waste. I mean, this is the thing that people forget when they're dealing with ships. Often, the more simple, more basic vessels, warships or merchant ships, well maintained, can keep going forever. Not actually forever. That is being absurd. For many years, decades, many decades. If you're talking about in modern scenarios, look at the river class patrol vessels. The successors of the sloops in so many ways. What is there on them that is going to go out of date? The cannon? The ability to launch boats? What is there on them that is so high-tech it's going to go out of date? Nothing. So, as long as the hulls are good, as long as the engines work, as long as they have got suitable accommodations for their crew, you can keep them going. Now, again, with these vessels, you could point around to me and go, well, Alex, can they fit them? Can they fit them with ASDIC? To which I would respond, well, if you're going to be fixing and maintaining the hulls anyway, you can fit ASDIC as part of that program. They've got quadruple expansion engines, for want of a better word, 4-cylinder triple expansion engines. Those are reliable as anything. 2 boilers. It's basically the same setup as they're going to build with the Flower-class corvettes in World War II, and they're not much dissimilar in terms of speed. And they run on coal. And that's useful for the UK. That is useful for the UK because the UK has a lot of coal. It doesn't have to import fuel for these ships. So realistically, getting rid of them is stupid. And you can then point out to me and go, well, Alex, they didn't know war was coming. No, but as of, you can say that for all the earlier ones, but I'm only get to 1932 and they decided war's coming within 10 years. Selling off ships like this, breaking ships up like this, that is something that is really, absolutely absurd. You should at least keep them in reserve until you've replaced them. You should at least keep them available to be called up until you've replaced them. You can use them as the kernels of growing your reserve forces if you wish. There are lots of options for them. But getting rid of them is really not a sensible one. Because it doesn't provide you with much money. It doesn't provide you with any offset in terms of crew numbers because you use a reservist for them. All it's doing is stripping you of hulls and hull availability. And again, if we go back to that list, we think about that list. There are 6 vessels on this list. 6 vessels. It says he counted it earlier, so I'm going to check it again. It starts off with Dahlia. She is sold for breaking up in 1932. Okay, Dahlia. Then we have Foxglove, of course, who does actually serve. And shows that they would have been useful if they had been there. And then, of course, we have Laburnum, which is hulked in 1935. So lose their engines in 1935. Then we have Mallow, which is the Royal Australian Navy, which dismantled it in July 1932 and sank as a target in 1935. Then we have, after that, we have Veronica, which is 5. I'm sure there was a 6th. Oh, and Magnolia. They are all broken up or dismantled after 1932 or later. Now, There are lots of people who might make the claim that 6 more sloops, like vessels, would not have been useful. I don't see that. If you have more sloops, you probably have one of them wandering around Scarpa Flow, in which case Royal Oak might not have been lost. Because it doesn't take much patrolling around Scarpa Flow to even make that little gap which they got through to get into it an impractical gap to go through. It doesn't take much in terms of extra vessels presence, because if you have 6 more of these older sloops wandering around, what does that free up in terms of the more modern ships to be with? Do you have another destroyer sitting with HMS Courageous and HMS Ark Royal when they're doing their anti-submarine warfare? What does that other destroyer do? There are lots of potential impacts of having those 6 extra ships, and the Acacia class are not the only class which are like this. You can go through the entire Flower class and all the subsequent vessels from World War I, and you can find ships in there which are sold off when they probably shouldn't have been. Because even if you've been planning on replacing them, well, we'll replace them by 1942 anyway, keep them in reserve, keep them maintained and sitting on the sidelines in reserve until you replace them. Delay your selling them off. Because it's better to have them than not. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And the question, of course, for this video is going to be something very simple and very easy. One, actually I'm going to make it 2 parts. One, do you think if they'd been preserved, they would have, if they'd been maintained in service, they would have had ASDIC added to them? I think they would have done. And I think a program of adding ASDIC to them is quite easy to accommodate within the wider program that was going on. And I would add in that, frankly, it would be useful. I'd also add that if they add the extra capacity you build into the peacetime systems to add those extra ASDIC units helps with wartime expansion. It might not seem like much, but everything you add into the peacetime orders creates more of a throughput and more of an infrastructure requirement, which raises it up, which then in wartime, when you go to triple shifts and various other things in production, can really see much greater dividends. But separate to the ASDIC, adding of ASDIC question, is this. Do you think there would have been an impact with the 6 more such vessels available in 1939? I think there would have been, because that's 6 more places you could have covered. Or 6 places that you were already covered that can be covered by something smaller and a lot cheaper that can rip up the line to leave other things free to be elsewhere. But what do you think? Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Hope you found it useful.